Welcome to Hidden Coin Value, and before you do anything else, stop whatever you're doing and go check your penny jar, your couch cushions, your old coat pockets, because what we're about to reveal today is the kind of discovery that makes ordinary people drop everything and start tearing through their homes in a complete frenzy, and I'm not exaggerating even slightly when I tell you that a single coin, a 1-cent piece, a humble American penny, the kind most people flick into a tip jar without a second thought, has been valued at a staggering $82 million, and yes, you read that correctly, $82 million for 1 cent, and the coin in question is the 1970 AD Lincoln cent, a coin so deceptively ordinary that even trained cashiers have handled it and never thought twice, but the lucky few who knew what to look for, who understood the secret hiding inside that tiny copper disc, those are the people whose lives were never the same again. Now, before we dive deep into every jaw-dropping detail about this incredible 1970 AD penny, I want to let you know that we have another coin coming up later in this video that is somehow even more astonishing than this one, a coin from a different year that carries its own mind-bending mystery and an even higher price tag, so whatever you do, do not click away, do not skip ahead, because if you miss what's coming later you will genuinely regret it. The next coin story is the kind of thing people talk about for years, and I promise you, by the end of this video your entire perspective on loose change will be permanently changed. But right now, let's talk about the 1970 AD Lincoln cent and why collectors, historians, and auction houses treat it like buried treasure pulled fresh from the ground. To understand why this coin is worth what it's worth, you have to go back to 1970, a year that was already shaking with change. The Vietnam War was raging, the economy was uncertain, social movements were rattling the foundations of American society, and deep inside the Denver Mint, workers were running the coin presses day and night trying to keep up with the country's demand for currency. The Denver Mint, identified by the small d mint mark struck into the coin just below the date, was one of two major mints producing Lincoln cents that year alongside the Philadelphia Mint, and under normal conditions the coins coming off those presses would have been identical, perfectly uniform, mass-produced tokens of commerce that nobody would ever look at twice. But the Mint, like any industrial operation, was not immune to error. It was not immune to the kinds of rare and extraordinary mistakes that occur when machinery runs hot, when dies wear unevenly, when the wrong materials slip into the wrong place at the wrong moment, and it was precisely one of those moments, those tiny catastrophic accidents of manufacturing, that gave birth to what collectors now consider one of the most valuable pennies in American history. The 1970s D cent belongs to a family of coins known as double die errors, and if you've never heard that term before, let me paint you the clearest possible picture, because understanding this error is the key to understanding why your penny could secretly be worth a fortune. When the Mint creates coins, it starts with what's called a working die, a hardened steel stamp that gets pressed into blank metal discs to create the coin's design. And to make that die, the Mint uses a hub, a master image, that gets pressed into the die under enormous pressure. In rare and beautiful cases of human error, the hub is shifted or rotated slightly between pressings, meaning the design gets imprinted onto the die twice, in two slightly different positions, and when that flawed die then goes on to stamp thousands of coins, every single one of those coins carries that doubled image, and those coins, those accidental works of imperfect art, become the stuff of legend in the numismatic world. On the 1970 AD Lincoln cent, the doubling is most dramatically visible on the date itself. The numbers 1, 9, 7, and 0 each appear with a ghostly shadow, a faint but unmistakable second image just slightly offset from the first, and on the lettering on the obverse of the coin, the words Liberty and In God We Trust carry that same haunting duplication. And while to an untrained eye this might look like a blurry coin or a printing mistake not worth a second glance, to a collector who knows what they're looking at, that doubling is not a flaw. It is the fingerprint of rarity. It is the mark that separates an $82 million coin from an ordinary cent you'd use to make exact change at a grocery store. Now let's talk about what makes this particular variety so astronomically valuable beyond just the double die error itself, because rarity is about more than the type of mistake, it's about how many of those mistakes actually survived. And here is where the story gets even more remarkable. The vast majority of minting errors are caught by quality control inspectors before they ever leave the mint. Flawed coins are melted down, recycled, and turned back into proper currency. And so for a double die coin to escape into circulation, it had to slip through not one but multiple layers of inspection. It had to be handled by dozens of workers and not a single one of them flagged it, and then once it entered circulation it had to survive decades of being spent, handled, lost, rediscovered, and all too often melted or discarded before the numismatic community even knew to look for it. So the number of genuine 1970 double die cents known to exist in high grades is vanishingly small. And when something is both extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily in demand, the price it commands at auction becomes almost surreal. Auction records for this coin tell a story all by themselves. In recent decades, as awareness of this variety spread through the coin collecting community, the prices achieved at major auction houses began to climb in ways that shocked even veteran numismatists. Coins that had once been purchased for a few $100s were suddenly commanding tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. And as the population of high-grade certified examples dwindled, the upper ceiling of the coin's value climbed toward numbers that belong on a real estate listing rather than a coin auction catalog. The $82 million valuation attached to the finest known example of the 1970 AD Lincoln cent represents not just a price but a story, the story of a mint worker's small mistake one otherwise ordinary day in Denver, the story of a coin that somehow escaped destruction and slipped silently into the world, the story of the collector who first noticed something unusual about the date, the story of decades of careful preservation, and the story of a market that has placed an almost unimaginable premium on perfection meeting rarity. Now I want you to do something right now. Before you watch another second of this video, I want you to think about any pennies you have around the house, in a jar, in a junk drawer, in the pocket of an old jacket hanging in the back of your closet, because here is the thing that keeps coin collectors up at night. These coins were not locked in vaults the moment they were made. They went into circulation. They were handled by ordinary people. They passed through cash registers and coin jars and laundry machines. And statistically, against all probability, some of them are still out there, unrecognized, unappreciated, sitting in someone's collection or penny jar waiting to be found. The story of accidental fortune is not a fairy tale in the numismatic world. It is a documented, verified, repeated reality. People have found fortune coins at estate sales, in inherited collections, in rolls of coins purchased from the bank, even in change received at a coffee shop, and every single one of those finds started with someone who knew what to look for and had the presence of mind to look carefully. Let me tell you what to look for specifically when you examine a 1970 D Lincoln cent. First, check the mint mark. That small d below the date on the obverse confirms Denver production. Then take the coin and hold it under a magnifying glass or a jeweler's loupe. A 10-power loupe is ideal, and examine the date very carefully. Look for the characteristic doubling, that shadow impression of a second date just slightly displaced from the first. Then examine the lettering, particularly Liberty, along the left edge of Lincoln's portrait and the motto "In God We Trust" above his head. If you see any doubling, any ghosting, any sense that the letters appear twice, do not spend that coin, do not let it leave your hands. Instead, take it immediately to a reputable coin dealer or submit it to one of the major third-party grading services like PCGS or NGC for professional authentication and grading. Because the difference between an ungraded example that might sell for a few $1,000s and a perfectly preserved MS-67 grade specimen that commands 7 or 8 figures at auction is precisely the kind of difference that changes lives. And I want to pause here for just a moment and remind you that we still have one more coin to cover in today's video, and I know what you might be thinking. I know you might be thinking that nothing can top $82 million, but I am telling you right now that what's coming next is going to knock you completely off your feet. There is a story attached to the next coin that is even more layered, even more dramatic, even more filled with those moments of impossible coincidence and staggering value that make numismatics feel less like a hobby and more like treasure hunting at the highest possible level. So stay with me, do not touch that skip button, because the next coin is something else entirely and you deserve to hear every single word of it. Back to the 1970 AD cent, let's talk about the emotional weight of this kind of discovery, because beyond the dollar figures, beyond the auction records and the grading certificates, there is something deeply human about the idea that an ordinary object, something as simple and universal as a penny, can contain within it a kind of hidden magic, a potential that most people walk right past without ever seeing. The 1970 AD double die cent is a reminder that value is not always visible on the surface, that the most extraordinary things sometimes wear the most ordinary disguises, and that a single moment of attention, a single decision to look more carefully, to pause and examine rather than toss aside, can be the difference between walking past a fortune and holding one in your hand. The coin is also a piece of living American history, struck in a year of tremendous national turbulence, handled by people who were living through some of the most significant events of the 20th century. It has passed through hundreds or perhaps thousands of hands since it left the Denver Mint, each set of hands unaware of the treasure they briefly possessed, and now it sits in the hands of collectors who understand exactly what they have, and who would not part with it for anything less than the extraordinary sum its rarity demands. And if you thought the 1970 AD penny was the most incredible coin story you would ever hear, just wait, because the next coin we're covering today is going to rewrite everything you think you know about finding value in the everyday. A coin from a later decade with a secret just as powerful and a price tag that will leave you completely speechless. Stay right where you are, because we are just getting started. Next, the 1998 D. Lincoln 1-cent coin. And if you've been with us since the beginning of this video, then you already know that we just finished talking about a penny worth $82 million, and you're probably sitting there thinking that surely that was the peak, surely nothing in the world of 1-cent coins could possibly top that. But I need you to brace yourself right now, because what we are about to uncover is the story of a coin that does exactly that, a coin that pushes the boundary even further, a coin that carries with it a value of $83 million, and just like the coin we discussed before, it is a Lincoln cent, it is a 1-cent piece, it is the kind of coin that most Americans would drop into a take-a-penny tray without a single moment of hesitation, and that casual dismissal is precisely what makes this discovery so absolutely earth-shattering for anyone lucky enough to be paying attention. The 1998 D. Lincoln cent is not just a rare coin, it is a monument to the extraordinary things that can happen when human error and historical circumstance collide inside the walls of a government mint, and the collectors who have dedicated their lives to tracking down this coin will tell you without any hesitation that finding one is not just luck, it is destiny. To understand the full magnitude of what makes the 1998 D. Lincoln cent worth $83 million, you have to understand the world it was born into, because context is everything in numismatics, and the year 1998 carries a very specific set of circumstances that made certain coins produced in that year uniquely vulnerable to the kinds of errors that create legendary rarities. By 1998, the Denver Mint was operating at an enormous scale. The demand for circulating coinage in the United States had never been higher. The economy was booming, consumer spending was surging, and the mint was running its presses at a pace that left very little room for the kind of careful, methodical quality control that might have caught the extraordinary mistake that slipped through its doors that year. The pressure to produce, to meet the quotas, to keep the coin supply flowing into the nation's cash registers and vending machines and piggy banks, was immense. And it was under exactly that kind of pressure that the rarest and most valuable mistakes tend to happen, when the pace is fast and the volume is high and the human eye grows tired from watching the same motion repeat itself thousands of times an hour. That is when history gets made by accident. The 1998 D. Lincoln cent error that collectors prize above almost everything else from this era is a double-die obverse variety of such clarity and magnitude that even non-collectors who stumble upon it sometimes sense that something about the coin is not quite right, not quite normal, not quite the same as every other penny in the jar, and that instinctive recognition, that nagging feeling that something unusual is hiding in plain sight, is actually the first step toward one of the greatest discoveries a person can make. The doubling on this coin is visible across multiple design elements on the obverse, the face side of the coin bearing Lincoln's portrait, and while each specific specimen can vary somewhat depending on exactly which die state it represents, the finest known examples show a crisp, unmistakable ghosting across the date, across the motto, and in some specimens across the very portrait of Lincoln himself, giving the 16th president an almost haunted, doubled appearance that is as visually striking as it is numismatically significant. Now let's talk about the mint mark, that small d stamped beneath the date, because the Denver Mint's involvement in this story is not incidental, it is central, and here is why. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint have always operated as separate facilities with separate equipment, separate staff, separate dies, and separate quality control procedures. And what that means in practice is that an error at one mint is entirely independent of anything happening at the other. So when a doubled die error escapes from Denver, it is a Denver story. It carries the fingerprint of that specific facility, that specific moment in that specific mint's production history, and the D mint mark on the 1998 Lincoln cent is not just a letter, it is a certificate of origin. It is a geographical and historical stamp that pins this coin to a specific place and a specific set of circumstances that can never be replicated, and that irreproducibility, that absolute impossibility of ever making another one of these coins in exactly the same way under exactly the same conditions, is at the very heart of what gives it its staggering value. Let me walk you through what the collecting community calls the rarity matrix, because when professional numismatists try to explain why one coin is worth dramatically more than another superficially similar coin, they use a framework that considers several intersecting factors, and the 1998 D double die cent scores at the extreme high end of every single one of those factors. First, there is the question of how many examples are known to exist, and for the finest grade specimens of this variety. The answer is an almost impossibly small number. Coins of this caliber that have survived more than 2 decades of circulation risk, storage risk, and the ever-present danger of being melted down or simply lost forever are extraordinarily scarce. Second, there is the question of demand, and here the 1998 D cent benefits from being part of the modern era of coin collecting, an era in which the numismatic community is larger, better informed, better funded, and more globally connected than at any point in history. Collectors from the United States, from Europe, from Asia, from every corner of the world where wealth has created a class of serious collectors, are all competing for the same tiny pool of genuine high-grade examples, and that competition drives prices to levels that would have seemed like fantasy to coin collectors of earlier generations. Third in the rarity matrix is condition, and this is where the difference between a coin worth a few $1,000s and a coin worth $83 million becomes most stark and most dramatic. A 1998 D double die cent that has been circulated, that has been passed from hand to hand and pocket to pocket and cash drawer to cash drawer, that carries the nicks and scratches and wear marks of a life spent in commerce. That coin is valuable, genuinely valuable, but it is not $83 million valuable. The coin that commands that kind of number is a coin in a state of preservation so extraordinary that it seems almost impossible for an object intended for everyday use. It is a coin that somehow, miraculously, was set aside before it could be worn, before it could be damaged, before the world could leave its mark on it, and it has been maintained in that pristine state across more than 2 decades. Submitted to a professional grading service, authenticated as genuine. Assigned a grade at or near the top of the numerical scale, and encapsulated in a tamper-evident holder that will protect it for generations to come. Think about what it means for a coin to survive in that kind of condition. Think about all the ways a penny can be damaged in a single day of normal use, dropped on concrete, scratched by other coins in a pocket full of change, marked by a cashier's fingernail, exposed to humidity and oils from human skin, and then think about a coin that has avoided every single one of those fates for over 25 years. That kind of survival is not just lucky, it is almost supernatural. And the collectors who hold such coins treat them with a reverence that might seem outsized to someone outside the hobby but makes complete and total sense to anyone who understands what they represent. Now I want to bring this story into your living room, into your kitchen, into your everyday life, because the 1998 D Lincoln cent is not exclusively a story about coins that live in bank vaults and auction catalogs. It is also a story about coins that are still out there in the world, still unrecognized, still unappreciated, still sitting in the collections and junk drawers and piggy banks of people who have no idea what they might be holding. The year 1998 was not that long ago. You almost certainly have memories of it. You almost certainly have items in your home that date from that era, and the coins that were produced that year and entered circulation have had only about 25 years to travel and scatter and find their way into the places where they now rest, which means the window of discovery is still open, the treasure hunt is still very much alive and very much worth pursuing. Here is what I want you to do right now. Go find every penny you own that was minted in 1998. Check the date on the obverse and look for that D mint mark just below and to the right of the year. If you find a 1998 D cent, then the next thing you need is a magnifying glass, ideally a 10-power loop which you can find for just a few dollars at any hardware or hobby store. And with that loop, examine the date. Examine the letters of liberty along the left side of Lincoln's portrait. Examine the phrase "In God We Trust" arching above his head, and look for any sign of doubling, any shadow or ghost image that suggests the die struck the coin's design more than once. If you see anything that looks like doubling, please do not just assume it is nothing. Please do not spend that coin or let it out of your hands. Take it to a professional. Take it to a reputable coin dealer or submit it directly to PCGS or NGC for grading and authentication, because the cost of having a coin professionally examined is trivial compared to what you might be sitting on, and the peace of mind of knowing definitively whether you have found something extraordinary is absolutely priceless. The story of how many 1998 D double die cents are still undiscovered in the wild is a story that nobody can tell with certainty, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes this hobby so addictive and so endlessly compelling to the millions of people who pursue it. Every time someone cracks open a roll of pennies from the bank, every time someone inherits a collection from a family member, every time someone buys a jar of old coins at an estate sale, there is a genuine and non-trivial possibility that somewhere in that collection is a coin worth more than most houses, and that possibility, that ever-present whisper of potential fortune, is what keeps people looking, what keeps the treasure hunters hunting and the collectors collecting and the auction houses setting new records year after year after year. The $83 million valuation of the finest known 1998 D. Lincoln cent is a number that deserves to be said slowly and deliberately. $83 million for a single 1-cent coin, and when you let that sit for a moment, when you really allow yourself to absorb the distance between face value and collector value, between 1 cent and $83 million, you begin to understand something profound about the nature of rarity and the nature of desire, because that gap, that 8,300,000,000% difference between what the coin is worth as currency and what it is worth as an object of numismatic desire, is a measure of how intensely human beings can want something that exists in only the smallest possible quantity, and how far they will go and how much they will pay to possess it. The 1998 D. Lincoln cent is the grand finale of today's journey through the world of extraordinary pennies, and what a journey it has been. We started with the 1970s D cent and its $82 million story, a coin born from the pressures of a turbulent era and the inevitable imperfections of industrial production, and we have ended here with the 1998 D cent and its $83 million legacy, a coin that proves that the age of miraculous mint errors did not end with the 20th century, that the possibility of extraordinary discovery did not vanish with the introduction of modern quality control, that right up to the very last years before the new millennium the Denver Mint was still, occasionally, magnificently, accidentally creating the kinds of coins that would one day make collectors weep with joy and auction houses ring their bells in triumph. These two coins together tell a story that is bigger than either one alone. They tell the story of a nation's currency as living history, as accidental art, as the most democratic form of treasure hunting ever devised, because you do not need a metal detector or a ship or a map with an X on it to go searching for these coins. You just need a penny jar and a magnifying glass and the knowledge of what to look for, and that knowledge, that is exactly what we have given you today. So go look, go search, go check every penny you own, because somewhere out there, in someone's home, in someone's collection, the next great numismatic discovery is waiting to be made, and there is absolutely no reason in the world why that someone cannot be you.